So we got a Mando and Grogu trailer last week, and there's a few things that I think are important to point out throughout the trailer. But starting from the beginning, we have a little bit of Star Wars music, which is nice. I hope we get a lot of that in the movie. The John Williams music, which hasn't been there much in the shows, and I've said this before in other videos, but the Star Wars music, the John Williams Star Wars music, is a very important part of getting Star Wars to feel like Star Wars. And for some reason, Disney hasn't entirely used a ton of that type of music in their shows. Maybe because they want to keep it for the movies, I'm not sure, but I think it's something they should utilize and it would do good for them. Now, again, the first essentially 16 seconds of the trailer are the teaser we got the day before the trailer, so that's the same. Grogu still hasn't grown up. He's still very much a toddler, even though he's at least 50 years old or more than that now. But I think at some point they're going to need to age him up because I think, for me at least, and I know there's probably some other people that think like this, I think the cuteness of Baby Yoda is getting a little old. And I'd like to see him act more, not like Yoda, because Yoda was at the end of his life, but see him a little more mature and talk a little bit. Because if Yoda was around 900 years old when he died, and kind of keeping that logic with Grogu, so let's say Yoda lived to 900 and let's say 1,000 years is like 100 years for a human. If Yoda was 90 when he died, using that logic, Grogu is assuming right now he's 50 or somewhere around there. He's right around 5 years old. So you'd assume he learned to talk by then. And I don't really know what they're going to do with him in the future because, you're going to have to age him. Another 100 years is going to have to go by before he reaches anywhere near being an adult. So if he wanted to use him and if he wanted him to fight or anything like that, he's right around 5 years old right now. So you probably can't do that and make it look cool or make it look anything like Yoda. So I'm not sure what the plan is for that. But anyways, back to the trailer, Mando and Grogu. Well, Mando mostly seems to be after one of the Hutts, and he has a bounty out for him. And kind of speculating, I'm sure the Hutts find out about this and then put a bounty on his head, which is why which is why you probably see Embo, who is another bounty hunter who we see in the trailer, go after Mando. Embo's from the Clone Wars, and I think it's pretty cool that he's back. Now we also see this group of people, remnants of the Empire, involved in some way, probably kind of like how we see them in the earlier Mando seasons, in these little sections of the galaxy controlled by the Empire. There's probably some sort of thing that the Empire wants that I think maybe conflicts with what Mando also wants, and I'm not sure how they tie in together, but I'm sure they do in some way. There are parts of this trailer that look pretty cool. One of them being the scene where Mando cuts down those two snow troopers, which probably also means we see some Hoth or maybe some other type of snow planet. But I think for this movie to do well, the action needs to be really good, and I personally would like to see a lot of action. I think if they lean into that, kind of like the scene I just described, I think that would bode well for the movie. It also seems like we see Grogu in some action, and it looks weird because he's like a puppet, so it seems a little weird. I don't know that I'm sure there are gonna be scenes where he uses the Force. I just hope it doesn't look goofy, I guess. But I think him using the Force every once in a while won't be bad and in some sort of creative way. But I don't think it should be goofy in like a kid type of way, which, they may lean into because they may be leaning on the fact that there's going to be a lot of kids wanting to see Grogu in the movie. So him doing this kid funny stuff, any sort of goofy kid stuff, they may lean into that, which, I hope not. I know there are obviously going to be people taking their kids to this. I think kids will be able to enjoy this if there's none of that in it. And I think it would definitely help them out if they didn't include that stuff because I'm sure the majority of people buying tickets and watching the movie are not going to be kids in the sense that like that would probably be funny to little kids. But I think anyone over the age of 12 probably doesn't care whether there's goofy stuff in this or not. But anyways, they also talk about preventing another war in the trailer. Now, obviously, they're probably talking about the war with the Empire and not letting the Empire come back to life, assuming the New Republic is in full force at this time, which I'm pretty sure it is. That likely means they're trying to prevent any sort of Empire ringing or anything like that from rising back into power. So the New Republic is kind of taking over the power vacuum in the galaxy. Another thing we see is Grogu getting his armor. Now it seems like, well, there's two different things to kind of talk about in terms of that. There are scenes of him acting in the Mandalorian sort of way with his armor, and then there's also a scene of him meditating. So it kind of seems like he hasn't chosen what path he really wants to take, or he's choosing the Tar Vizsla path and living both. That remains to be seen. We'll see what they end up doing with that. And obviously we see him with Luke choose to go back with Mando, in the book of Boba Fett and essentially choose to be a Mandalorian over training to be a Jedi. And so we get a little bit of that, but I think the meditation is an interesting element. We also see Grogu walking with this stick, and it looks like Yoda's stick, which I think is cool and a kind of callback to Yoda. Um, Maybe hinting at something. Maybe Grogu, through his deep meditation, has a sort of conversation with Force Ghost Yoda. Um, Possibly, possibly not. I don't know. I'm just kind of brainstorming here, but and then you kind of get this creature that is talking to Yoda, and I think it's interesting because I've seen people point out that it looks like Yoda's master. And while it doesn't look like the version in Legends that is described as how Yoda's master looked, I think it's very possible that Disney is adapting their own version of that in live action, which they have done before with other things. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's something they do. I think that would be very interesting and cool. Now, I don't know that this person would be the exact same dude as his master, but maybe they're using him and adapting him to be Grogu's master because we never get to see Yoda train with his master. So maybe this is their version of that, Disney's version. So a few interesting things to kind of point out about the trailer. A lot of stuff I didn't totally realize the first time I watched it, and I had to watch it a few times to really look and see everything that I'm talking about now. And then we see this fight scene with Mando and Rada, which is the baby from the Clone Wars movie that Anakin and Obi-Wan had to protect and kind of save and bring back to Jabba, Jabba's son. So he's now grown up and he's this gladiator. He doesn't look like your typical Hutt. He's pretty ripped and jacked. And I think it's been reported that Mando is hunting him, like he has a bounty out on him, on Rada. And I'm not sure who gave the bounty to Mando, and I don't think it's been reported why, but they're going to meet and end up fighting. So we'll see some of that. And there's going to be all sorts of creatures in this. There's a big creature that Mando looks like he's about to fight, or something called the Dragon Snake, kind of referring to some Star Wars lore there. But yeah, we're going to see some other creatures. And then there's one in there towards the end of the trailer where Grogu kind of goes in between his legs and escapes that other monster. Another thing is, we see Zeb and we see him in some action. It'll be interesting to see what role he plays in this, whether he's a just a cameo or, you know, maybe a bigger part of this movie. I'm sure he'll meet up with Mando in some way where Mando's trying to figure out some information about, what he's looking for. And it'll be interesting to see if we see any other potential Rebels characters or Clone Wars characters. Dave loves his Rebels and Clone Wars characters, so I'm sure, there's a good chance we see others besides Zeb and Embo, and, some others. So, this movie is approaching fast. We got a decent amount in this trailer. I would say it's an okay trailer. Nothing blew me away or hyped me up to the point where I'm like desperate to see this movie. But maybe we get another trailer um, from now until the movie comes out. And, so wouldn't be surprised if that happens. But we'll see once this thing comes out. And that's it.